notes out. Okay? You will want your notes out in a separate tab. All right, there's the Paradigm link. So please get in. We'll have some questions, kind of review questions as we go through this. So we're going to start. Okay, so yes, we just talked about Saratoga. You saw a little video on it. We're going to move now to something that is called Valley Forge. Okay. First thing to know about Valley Forge, it's not a battle. So even though we're mainly talking about battles here, in this case, this is not a battle. Okay. So maybe that's something you just need to write down in like your in the margins or something. Or, I don't know, because I just want to make sure you understand that. All right. So and the time period we're talking about is essentially the winter of 1778, December through June. All right, so we got to set the stage a little bit. Even though we just got done talking about Saratoga, it being a major battle and a victory for the Americans in October of 77, so a few months before this. It's still the case that things were not going well for the Americans overall at this point. After Saratoga, they had lost some smaller skirmishes. General Howe, remember he was supposed to go to Saratoga, he didn't. He ends up capturing Philadelphia. Philadelphia is really the capital, if there was one, of the Continental Army, or of the colonies at that time. Okay, it was where the headquarters of the Continental Army was. It's where George Washington would have set up camp for the winter had he been able to. Okay. Thanks, Jeremiah, for letting us know. So George Washington is facing a circumstance here in December of 1777. He's got about 12,000 soldiers and nowhere to go with them. You can't go to Philadelphia. General Howe's there with his troops, and he's not going to engage General Howe with an army that's not very well trained at this point and sort of struggling. And he's just not going to fight a battle in the winter. And as we talked about last time, or one of the times last week, at this time period, and really up until very recently in history, armies didn't fight during the winter. Pretty much you took a break and you settled down. For obvious reasons, it's hard to do logistically. Okay, so Washington, he does need to take his men somewhere. They need to go somewhere. So he finds this land about 20 miles west of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, near a little village called Valley Forge. It's kind of some high rolling hills. He thinks this will be good. It's close enough to sort of keep an eye on what's going on in Philadelphia. He can send out spies and some kind of reconnaissance, but it's also far enough away in those days where there's going to be no surprise attack. Okay, and it's kind of a higher elevated area, so he can see if there were, pretty far. You can see. So if there was some sort of surprise attack, they'd be alerted to it. All right, but really, again, this winter is not about any kind of fighting. This is going to be about trying to train his troops, his men, to become a better army. Now, so they get there, I think I just read 6 days before Christmas, so December 19th, 1777. And when I say get there, they literally just got to an open bunch of farm fields. And it's winter. And, you got to lay your head down somewhere. So they literally have to get started building huts right away. They build about 2,000 huts. Out of the wood that they cut down in the area, and then they have thatched roofs out of leaves and sticks and branches and stuff like that. Now, Washington himself, there's a little farmhouse there that they kind of take over, and he has that as his kind of headquarters, and some of the other generals. But the rest of the rank and file, they need to build their own huts, and they do that. It's a tough winter because it's cold, obviously. These are not, they don't have central heating and, lazy boys and couches and, TVs and stuff. I mean, we're talking about extremely elemental surroundings and places to live. So the conditions are rough. The food supply is very low. Some of the men resort to eating flour cakes and eating, what's that word? Anyway, basically flour cakes is another word for flour cake. Hardtack?
Hardtack.
It's essentially just flour melted together. Um, their supplies, whether it's uniforms and rifles and muskets and stuff, are worn down and or not really existent. So it's not good. Um, but what Washington needs, and then disease starts to spread. So they're facing terrible, harsh conditions. They're facing low supplies, and disease spreads because these people are living in very close quarters. And once it, as we are learning now, contagious disease can spread quickly when people can't distance, right? We all know that now. But the thing that Washington needs to do the most during this time is train his army. He's a pretty good overall strategical thinker, but he's actually, the critique of him, he wasn't great at battle tactics, or at least training his men all by himself or with very little help, and he needed some help. And he was able to get a guy, and there was others actually who came, but a guy named Baron von Steuben from Prussia, so over near Germany in Europe, come over to America and help Washington train his men. And he was well known as a military trainer all throughout Europe. So he comes over, and with Washington and others, they basically put the Continental Army, Nathaniel, through a basic training, essentially. They put them through basic training in the midst of these terrible conditions, when they don't have boots necessarily. Sometimes they're out in the barefoot and freezing cold. But they make it. They get through it. And by the end of actually gets to spring, almost early summer, by May or June of 1778, it's halfway decent, maybe almost a professional army. Excuse me. Okay? And so that's really sort of the story of Valley Forge. Again, remember, not a battle, a time period where Washington has to hunker down and get through the conditions, but also train his men. Okay? So here's the question then, if you're listening. What was at least one difficulty Washington and the Continental Army faced while wintering at Valley Forge? So on the paradox, you should be answering this question right now. Hey, to the 25 of you who are not in Paradeck, the link is in the chat. All right, so what are we seeing so far? 11 out of the 40, whatever of you are participating. That's not great. I'm just going to say that is not great. Lack of food, lack of experience in clothing, spread of disease, lack of resources. All these are good. Harsh weather, lack of food. Hey, thanks for putting your name on that, Sky and Isabel. They had to build their own huts, and their food was very scarce. Yep. Harsh weather conditions, cold, good. Footwear, cold. Yep. The other thing, disease. It's supposed to be disease on that. Okay. The other thing was they had to go through basic training. They had to go through some really intense training. So that was another thing they faced.
That would be the German army in Africa. They were having an issue with diesel. That'd be.
Little military joke here. Okay. Nice job for those of you who are participating. Yes. All these things meant that they had to overcome all this. They had to, overcome all these difficulties, and I think they came out better for it. I don't think that. Historians think that. So. All right. So yeah, we just brutal weather, lack of supplies. You guys said all these spread of disease. We could add the difficult training, lack of food. That's good. There's kind of a famous painting of Washington overseeing his men during Valley Forge. Okay, so that leads us to the battle that's directly after Valley Forge. That because of the training they got at Valley Forge, they actually are ready to fight this battle. Now, did they win? We'll find out. As Mr. Ginter goes through this, but it's the Battle of Monmouth coming
up. There we go. All right. Thanks. Good segue there, Mr. Fair. All right. So we got to kind of set this up here a little bit, this Battle of Monmouth, because kind of the events surrounding it are far more interesting than the battle, at least in my opinion. You see, first of all, we have to understand who the commanders in this battle are. Coming out of Valley Forge, Washington recognizes that there's a lot of question marks regarding this army. I know they went through training and Steuben really pushed them hard, but is it enough to really make a difference? Well, the second in command, a guy by the name of Charles Lee, does not think so. He still does not have any faith in the Continental Army. And, part of that could just simply be he was jealous of von Steuben too, because Washington had leaned on von Steuben a lot, especially when Lee was away. And that's an interesting story in and of itself. Charles Lee was actually taken prisoner of war by the British, except Charles Lee was not subjected to kind of the conditions of the normal prisoners of war. He was actually kind of treated well by the British. He was, for instance, taken. Every night he would eat dinner with the British officers, and they would exchange war stories. Now, some of this, to be quite honest with you, was just kind of etiquette at the time. He didn't treat enlisted men the same way that you would have treated the officers. But people started to talk about Lee and his commitment to this war. A lot of people thought, well, maybe Charles Lee had been turned. So, kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we kind of talk about the Battle of Monmouth here a little bit. Let's see, the other guy involved was a guy by the name of Clinton. Now, Clinton actually replaces Howe, as commander of the British Army at this point. Okay, so going forward, we're going to be talking about two guys, Clinton and Cornwallis for the British. Howe, he's out. So Washington, coming out of Valley Forge, gets some intelligence that the British Army is on the move. But they're on the move, and they're all the British Army is all strung out. And the forward echelon of the British Army at this point is kind of the fighting force. In the back, there's more. It's much lighter in the back. Wagons, supplies, those types of things. So one of the things that Washington says is, here the British are primed for an attack. They're not in a very good defensive position because they're moving, and most of their fighting force is in the front third of this convoy, I guess, moving out of New Jersey. So Washington gets together with Lee and von Steuben, and they come up with a plan of attack. And here, Lee does something pretty interesting. He pretty much demands that he become the field commander in this battle. Now, he isn't second in command, so he could have definitely kind of bowed out and let somebody else do that. But being the second in command, he does have the prerogative to say, no, I'm going to lead the men, and that's what he does. The game plan here is that the Americans are going to kind of hook around and attack the British from the backside. And so on an absolutely sweltering morning, where it's in excess of 95 degrees in the shade, the battle begins. Matter of fact, it is so hot during the Battle of Monmouth. It's said that men left the protection of a sunny area just to lay in the shade, even though it would expose them to enemy fire. That's how hot it was. You got to imagine they're wearing these, wool uniforms, and they're fully clothed, and they're, in a lot of cases, running around. And I do also believe, Mr. Fair, you want to fact check me on this one probably, but I do believe this battle, more men died of dehydration than actual bullet wounds. Do you want to fact check me on that, though? Okay. We'll get Mr. Fair on that. He loves to tell me when I'm wrong about stuff. So anyway, super hot day. Super hot day. and the game plan is to swing around to the rear echelon of the British. So Washington now is going to take a place on the battlefield someplace so that he can kind of watch what's happening, and watch this battle unfold and move men where he needs to. And as he rides and closer to the battlefield, he doesn't hear anything. The attack was supposed to be well underway, and he doesn't hear the sounds of battle. And he rides a little bit closer, and what he discovers is that his men are actually in retreat. And he asks them, "Hey, where are you going?" And the men say, "Well, General Clinton had ordered a retreat." Well, Washington is kind of perplexed by this because he's got the British right where he wants them. He's got them strung out. He knows that he has the British outmanned at the point of attack. He knows the battle plan is good. He finally catches up to Lee on the battlefield itself as Lee is riding back, and General Washington gives Lee a good dressing down. He basically yells at Lee and swears at him. At least that's what a lot of military historians believe happened there. And it's never actually recorded that he did that, because you got to remember, Washington was like this, half man, half mythical figure, and nobody wanted to point out when Washington actually got upset or kind of lost his cool. So, that's what people believe though happened, because he immediately takes command. Now, here's what happens: he doesn't actually win the battle, but he basically fights it to a draw, which was much better than what was going to happen under Lee's command. The whole thing culminates in I think it's like a 3-hour artillery duel back and forth. And by the next morning, the British basically just leave the battlefield. So, and both sides are pretty much happy with that draw. So that is the Battle of Monmouth. Did Lee purposely retreat to try to give the British the field and a British victory? I guess it's one of those things we never will know.
So, backstory here: British suffered 300 casualties, Americans 350. Up to 100 men are thought to have died of heat stroke during the battle. Still a lot, but you weren't quite correct. All right, got another video coming at you for a little review of Monmouth. Here we go.
So I just noticed, because I can't see myself here, I just noticed only the top of my head was on the screen.
I thought you didn't even have your picture on it, did you?
Yeah, I can see it over here, so I know it's on.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I was looking at your other one. Yeah.
Should say something about bayonet. That's. We'll talk about it afterwards. Because I made sure to talk about it at the beginning of the training part.
What?
I made sure to talk about it at the beginning. We talked about the Americans versus the British in the training. That's why I just wanted to bring it back around for this. He's wearing a red uniform. So the other thing though is he actually swore at Lee, not some subordinate to him.
Right.
He says skedaddle. That was like a Civil War term, wasn't it?
I don't know, my dad used to use, in one of the skedaddle, get out of here, skedaddle.
I know, but he says it like it's,
Yeah, it
you know.
doesn't seem like it fits the time.
All right, here. The word came into U.S. military slang during the Civil War. Scottish word scaddle, as old as the 15th century. It means to run off in fright.
I think we go through the review next, right? The summary next, the review questions next, right? After this? Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. So that was a little summary of the Battle of Monmouth. Hey, one thing I forgot to mention though, you might remember when we talked about the strengths and weaknesses of the Americans and the British. I talked about training, and I talked about how the British were not only fluent with the artillery, but also with the bayonet. And you can see how von Steuben's training helped them to get comfortable using their own bayonet. And so you saw there that there was a good portion of the battlefield that was hand-to-hand combat using bayonets, and the Americans did not actually back down. All right, Mr. Fair, we're gonna do a little review here and see how well you guys remember some of these battles. All right, what was the first major battle and a devastating American defeat? The first major battle and a devastating American defeat. All right, what do we think here? Was it the Battle of Monmouth, the Battle of New York, the Battle of Trenton, or the Battle of Saratoga? What do we think?
There's a turn link right there.
Yeah, you can't win if you don't play. right, let's see, we got, well, like, 2/3 of you guys. Going, oh, now you screwed up my math. All right. A lot of you guys going with the Battle of New York. Mr. Fair, what is it?
It is
The Battle of New York. All right. What's the next one? What battle showed the improvement of the Continental Army after the winter at Valley Forge? Showed the improvement of the What battle showed the improvement of the Continental Army after the winter at Valley Forge? Was it the Battle of Monmouth, the Battle of New York, the Battle of Trenton, or the Battle of Saratoga? If nothing else, you are going to remember we talked about 4 battles so far. The Battle of Monmouth, the Battle of New York, the Battle of Trenton, and the Battle of Saratoga. What do we got? Ooh, let's see, we got, it looks like it's, looks like the Battle of Monmouth is running away from it. Running away with it. And it is the Battle of Monmouth. Yes. Just like Mr. Fair said, we just got done talking about that. All right, what battle took place just after Christmas and resulted in 868 Hessians being captured? Not 867, Mr. Fair. Not 869, Mr. Fair. But 868 German mercenaries being captured. Can't hear you. Let's play some.
I didn't want to be reading. I didn't want to be reading.
Oh.
No, I can't hear you. What happened?
Because there's something going on with the Bluetooth. So I'm not sure what we're doing now. All right, let's see. We got, let's see, 1 for the Battle of Monmouth, 1 for the Battle of New York, 14 for the Battle of Trenton, and 1 for the Battle of Saratoga. Mr. Fair, what do we got? The Battle of Trenton. That's right. That's Washington crossing the Delaware. What American victory led to an alliance with France? Wait a minute, Mr. Fair. I'm having this feeling of deja vu. It feels like I had talked about this at some point before. Where could I have heard this question before? What American victory led to an alliance with France? Was it the Battle of Monmouth, the Battle of New York, the Battle of Trenton, or the Battle of Saratoga?
I just scrolled up in the chat and I found the answer. Because it was
What?
our journal questions earlier.
It was the Battle of Saratoga. All right, John Burgoyne stumbling into that trap. How did the British avoid having an entire army captured after Washington placed the guns on Dorchester Heights in March of 1775?
This is going way back.
It is going way back. It's going all the way back to 1775, Mr. Fair. How did the British avoid having an entire army captured? What did the British do? What did they do? So, Boston is under siege.
Oh, yeah, I know.
And they had to somehow relieve the siege. They tried taking Bunker and Breed's Hill. That didn't work. The British took that right away. So they had to do something else. How did the British avoid having an entire army captured after Washington placed guns on Dorchester Heights? What do we have for answers there? Use bassinets. I think you meant bayonets, but I follow you.
Isn't that where you put the baby?
It is where you put the baby, yes. Let's see what else we got. Okay, so how did the British avoid losing an entire army? They fled. You're so close. Okay, here, it has nothing to do with bayonets or bassinets, okay? What do we got? Okay, here's a question. Here's a hint for you guys. How did they flee? How did they retreat? Yes. Now you guys should all get that Revolutionary War joke, right? Because you guys are all students of the Revolutionary War. How did they flee?
All right, we're going to the
We gotta get going here.
Oops, we don't have an answer.
We don't have an answer. We don't have an answer for that. All right. So the correct answer, the correct response to that would be, the correct response to that would be, the British loaded up soldiers from Boston on their ships, and they sailed away. Remember, they sailed off to Nova Scotia, and then they sailed back to New York to take New York a little bit later. But anyway, they sailed away. And the reason I bring this up is because that's a tactic that can be used because the British have a superior navy. And let's see how that plays into what I'm going to talk about next here. So the British end up shifting the focus of the war to the south under the command of General Cornwallis. And if you kind of do it, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about battles here, we're going to talk about actually one battle here. And that's because a lot of the battles are really kind of minor skirmishes. They're hit and run battles. The Continental Army would, well, under Nathaniel Greene or Francis Marion, which your book talks about both of those guys, they talk about how they really would utilize the guerrilla warfare strategy, which is basically coming in, firing a couple shots, getting out, getting the British to chase them, being very mobile. Well, it eventually wears Cornwallis out. He's got to go back to resupply at Yorktown. And he's also under command to take what's called a Deepwater Harbor. You might remember that the British took New York and hold New York simply for the fact that New York has a Deepwater Harbor and they can resupply their men. They can bring in men and they can bring in supplies. So one of the big reasons that they decide to kind of shift their battles to the south are that the British start to lose some key battles over the course of a year or so. They lose at the Battle of Cowpens, the Battle of Kings Mountain, the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. Now, when we talk about courthouse here, it's not actually being fought in a courthouse, okay? The word courthouse, and we'll see this during the Civil War, is actually kind of like a town, all right? So, like I said, Cornwallis was instructed to build that Deepwater Harbor at Yorktown so that they could build their base there, because remember, they're going to have more of a southern command here. At the same time, as this war is kind of shifting to the south, General Clinton is holding New York in the north, along with Washington and Rochambeau. They're both still up in the northern part of the country. And really, Clinton is waiting for Washington and Rochambeau to try to attack New York to take it. So Clinton thinks that New York is going to be attacked at some place. He just feels that's going to be inevitable. Well, around this time, Washington also gets word from General de Grasse, who is a French admiral, sailing his fleet from France. And he says he's bringing troops with him. Well, at the same time, de Grasse ends up tangling with the British Navy and ends up defeating the British Navy along the York River. Okay? So Washington and Rochambeau devise this plan. They know that Cornwallis is held up in Yorktown. And since de Grasse can hold the York River and prevent any kind of escape from Cornwallis, Washington and Rochambeau, along with those 3,000 French troops that just came in, decide that they can put Yorktown in siege. Because...
Zero minutes.
What?
0 minutes.
Okay. So anyway, the French and the American forces dig parallels, which are basically trenches. And they shell Yorktown. They end up basically taking Yorktown, and Yorktown formally surrenders.
So, Yorktown's the final battle in the war, is that what you're saying?
Yep, they surrender, and Cornwallis ends up surrendering the troops that are there, and the Americans win the war.
You can look at a map right here, you guys, but the key here is Yorktown is the final battle, the last battle, British surrender, Americans win. But if you see, this is Yorktown here. I'm on the left side. So we're down in Virginia, Chesapeake Bay, York River, not far from where Washington, D.C. is today, which is up here. New York City just has references way up here, if you can see my cursor. Another map just to kind of show you a more zoomed in map. As Mr. Ginter was saying, basically they have the city surrounded. And then they have the French Navy coming in up the York River and trap Cornwall and get it surrendered. Alright. So hey, you guys have your notes questions that you should have been finishing today, and they're due, so do not forget to submit those. Please submit those when you're done. If you're done now, submit them.